So I wanted to tell people that even though I always talk surrender. I'm not saying this to make people think there's no hope. Not at all. Because no matter what, God will always make things work the way that he wants them to. So there's no doubt he knew what would go on to happen. And actually, I had mentioned a couple days ago or so, I said, it's like there's two religions. There's the religion of Paul or Peter, you could say, and the one of John. The church, I should say church. And they're very different. And yet this is the reason why, I'm very passionate about what I say, because I've said I understand John's gospel, but John's gospel was the true church of God was carried through the heart of John. Now, this has been talked about, which is what's so amazing to me, is that it's been talked about that there is two churches. People recognize that John clearly knew the heart of Jesus. He knew the true church, and yet, but Jesus gave the keys to Peter. And yet, it makes sense because, well, the Catholic Church doesn't deny that they were always the authority. They knew Peter was the authority. That's all they cared about. Which is why Peter, over and over again, Jesus often would mirror, and then John went on. What's so strange is then later, after Jesus, John went on in his Gospels to do the exact same thing that Jesus did, which was to mirror Peter against Judas Iscariot over and over again. And obviously both having a different outcome, but the reason for that is this is how close you are to, losing, can be that close to your heart just being closed altogether. And then John goes on to do the same thing that Jesus does, this mirroring, because it's always lined with, Peter lying, then there's the Judas. So there's this mirror that historians or theologians noticed, okay, that both Jesus and John did with the two of them. Yet Peter was very much, it was more about the authority with him, just like it was with Paul. So I know that authority and that structure will be used as a stumbling block. Again, because in the Old Testament, the reason Jesus was a stumbling block for Jews that didn't know his Father was because in the Old Testament it said anybody hung on a tree is cursed. So that's why they would never accept Jesus. But that just became a stumbling block for them because they didn't know truly the Father. The people that knew who Jesus was knew the Father. And they were the nobodies, okay? So just like that, and was another place God has a stumbling block. And it's not to make people stumble. It's that the people that don't truly know him will stumble. So the Paul stuff, like about women and Peter saying stuff about women being silent in this hierarchy, that will all be a stumbling block. See, many people, and this is where the danger comes in, they've argued that there's been two churches. But everybody has said that, well, no, of course, Jesus wanted the true hierarchy and structure, the true hierarchy to go on, because with John's church, there's no structure, there's no hierarchy, right? So the human wisdom steps in and says, well, we know the church can't continue without a hierarchy. So that will be the stumbling block for that, because that's not true. Am I trying to say all the denominations aren't saved? No, that's not what I'm saying. Everybody's judged by the heart at the end of the day. But the reason I get so passionate about it sometimes is because it seems that there were some major things just overlooked, and all because the churches wanted to make it more about the book than their relationship with God. So what's even more interesting about this is that people have gone on to say that the church hierarchies, all the church denominations, they will be the churches of the past, and that John's church is the church of the future, that when in heaven. Some have said that, or they say the future. So I would say that definitely happened. That'll put all these churches to shame. And where did it carry over into AA? But AA is not a church. But it's exactly, there's a reason I see the Spirit of God so much in there. I've said it's just like you're sitting around with a bunch of angels. I mean, at times, because of some of the things that'll come, because we don't read the Bible, but I've read a lot of the Bible the last 5 years, and everything I've read, Jesus took me through because I was surrendering to him for the past 30 years. See, I went the route of surrendering and seeking him because that's what the steps brought me to do. So that's why I understand why God in 2020, was getting my attention and said, stick to the Bible. It wasn't because, and it was clear that no, still do what you're what you've done with turning your will and life over. I just want you to start looking in here, because what I found is, oh no, this is all stuff I've done. I knew all this. So just like Jesus says, I'll put it on your heart. Yeah, so that's what happened. So where did the Church of John truly continue? AA, because it's not a church. It's not about the book. It's about the true lived experience of your relationship with seeking the Holy Spirit. And that's what we sit around and talk about. And this was even went on to be said by a priest, no less, by a Father Richard Rohr, because this was asking me, do I think the Church of John continued? And I said yes, through Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's when it told me, even though, again, that's not a church. So don't think it's not a church, but God never wanted a church. He didn't want the hierarchy. He was the teacher. That's who's the teacher in those rooms. That's what we're talking about, is what the teacher did for us. So, but Father Richard Rohr has argued that Alcoholics Anonymous is actually the closest thing we have to the original church, because it operates on the John principles. Yeah, John was about surrender, so that's why I can relate to John. That's why the other apostles don't seem to have the heart. But again, he was also the loyal apostle. He was the most loved. So even though, yes, they can say Jesus wanted two churches, I think Jesus will use that as a stumbling block, okay? That because this is why John would mirror Judas and Peter in his gospel. Like, even though the authority stuff matters to you and you have authority over so many people, if you don't have the heart, what difference will it make? But it doesn't seem the Catholic Church really cared. They just wanted to claim that we have the apostle succession. You have nothing. You have nothing at the end of the day, except, bullshit. I mean, God will go on to judge everybody, by the heart, but they literally acknowledge that. So do you see how stupid that is? Do you? See, to me, it's an absolute stupidity. Because God is not about that hierarchy, but he knew that everybody that would stumble on it, would make that mistake. And again, I'm not saying they're all damned or anything. I'm just saying he'll judge by the heart. I don't think they have the heart, because that's not even close to the heart. But then people in their human wisdom thought, well, John's church can't carry on because there's no hierarchy, there's no authority, right? But it did carry on, because God can do anything. He doesn't need it. AA is not even called a church. We are not a religion. It's just God, and sometimes that's replaced with higher power, because God wasn't picking which religion he was going to heal, okay? So we just stick to higher power, whatever. It's just open to healing. And so we talk about what that God's done to heal us. That's why I relate to John's gospel. The true church did carry on in John here in America through Alcoholics Anonymous, which is why America is in the book of Revelations, the church to Philadelphia.